This episode is brought to you by my very first book, The Fifth Vital Sign: Master Your Cycles and Optimize Your Fertility. With over 1,000 research citations, it is the most comprehensive resource on fertility awareness and the menstrual cycle to date. The Fifth Vital Sign is available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook formats on Amazon.com. Listen to The Fifth Vital Sign for free when you sign up for a 30-day trial with Audible. Visit fertilityfriday.com/audible for details. That's fertilityfriday.com/audible. This episode is brought to you by my free 3-part video series, FAM 101. Discover how to chart your cycles by tracking the 3 main fertile signs: cervical mucus, basal body temperature, and cervical position, and ultimately develop body literacy by paying attention to your fertile signs. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAM101 to grab your free copy. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAM101. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 260. Welcome to the 260th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I've got a great episode to share with you today. I'm really excited to share my interview with Meghan Telpner. And, in this episode, we really get into the idea of preconception planning. And I really like the way that Meghan spoke about it. It really gives us some perspective, even if pregnancy is not something that you're considering right now, but it is something on your horizon, whether it's within the next couple of years or even way down the line, like 10 years from now. Meghan gives us some great food for thought about how we can be thinking about it, how we can be preparing for it even now, when for many of us, it might be something that's way off in the future. So I know you'll appreciate today's episode. And without further ado, let's jump right in. And I'm very excited to welcome my guest, Meghan Telpner, to the show today. Meghan is a Toronto-based author, speaker, nutritionist, and founder of the Academy of Culinary Nutrition. She's the author of 2 best-selling, award-winning books, UnDiet, Eat Your Way to Vibrant Health, and the UnDiet Cookbook. Meghan has been featured in Forbes, was ranked as one of the top 100 female entrepreneurs in Canada by Profit Magazine, and was named Best Holistic Nutritionist in 2017 and 18 by National Nutrition Awards. With over 10 years in the field, Meghan works tirelessly to empower her global community of Certified Culinary Nutrition Experts to become health leaders in their respective communities. So you've been really busy and you've been doing a lot, and you're a new mom. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about preconception planning and detoxing. We're also going to jump into planning for the postpartum period if we have some time. So I'm really excited to have you on the show. Thanks for being here, Meghan.
Thank you so much for having me and for all the amazing work you do in helping moms in waiting and people wanting to be moms and everyone through this heroic journey, I guess we could call it.
I think it's heroic.
Yeah.
It's super intense as a new mom, I would say. It's like you're entering into a completely new world. And I feel like anything we can do to prepare for that is really, really necessary and helpful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And going into it informed is the best way forward, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so, as we went through in the introduction, you've been doing your specific work in your field for a really long time. You've put together just basically an incredible body of work thus far. And so I would be really interested to hear a little bit about what inspired you to start. How did you find yourself specializing in nutrition in the ways that you do, and kind of what has led you to this point?
Absolutely. I started in the field of holistic nutrition in 2007, I think is when I completed my studies. And what inspired me to even pursue it was my own health challenge. In 2006, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, which is an autoimmune and inflammatory bowel disease. And conventional medicine to this day tells people there's no known cause and no known cure. There's no one cure, but you can definitely support healing. And there are known causes or contributing factors. And I didn't know this at the time. I was just given this sort of prognosis that terrified me. And because there was no hope given, I took it upon myself to try and find solutions so that I was not going to be living a life with so many unknowns and in and out of hospitals and all the factors that are the reality of someone with an autoimmune disease. And that was what basically inspired me to study nutrition, is that I was doing independent research, trying to heal and going to Chinese medicine and practicing yoga and meditation, and all these things we know are good for us. I actually went and did all at once. And the result was that I had rapid and dramatic healing. This was towards the end of 2006, and it's now 2019, and I'm remain 100% symptom-free from disease I was told was incurable. And so it was my healing experience that inspired me to go and study nutrition, to figure out what it was I had done in my body that I'd been told was impossible. And after learning a little bit in school, I realized that there was a major gap missing in the education of health, and that was around actually cooking. So, we can read all the books in the world, we can juice all the celery, which is this current craze that's driving me nuts. But if we don't know how to prepare our meals and feed ourselves and feed our families, we're going to be persistently at a deficit. And there are so many environmental factors that play into our health now that didn't exist 40 years ago or 50 years ago or 100 years ago, in some cases even 20 years ago. So what inspired me to start the business that I have was that I wanted to create community around good food and teach people how to cook. And so I started out with small cooking classes in my little loft here in Toronto. And over the last decade, that has grown into a online school with a global student base of over 1,800 students in 57 countries. And as you mentioned, I have my books, and my drive is continuously to help empower people to know how to feed and nourish themselves for their optimal health throughout their lifespan, which is, like, when it comes to motherhood, is so critical, because how we eat to heal, for example, may not be how we need to eat to become pregnant or to sustain a healthy pregnancy or to have a healthy postpartum, or to then, for me, it wasn't even postpartum that was the hardest, but like the year after that, adjusting to life with a child and all that comes with it. So that's really sort of what was at the root of my work and continues to be, is how do I help people to become their own best health experts and know how to best care for themselves and those in their lives.
Mm-hmm. There's a few things I picked up on in what you said. And one of the things that I appreciated was that you said that sometimes the diet that you need to heal isn't the same as the diet that you need to try to conceive. And there's a lot there to unpack, as I'm sure you know, but there's this idea, I think a lot of people have this idea, or at least the wish that there was just one perfect diet for all of mankind, or humankind, I should say. And if we all just figure out what that is, that everything's going to be great. And kind of like the idea that one diet is the same thing that you're going to be eating all throughout your life.
It would make it very simple.
It would.
If everyone had needed to eat the exact same 12 foods, that would be very, very easy. But it's not the case. And not only that, it's that like what you eat, Lisa, to sustain your health isn't going to be what I need right now. If we're at different stages in our lives with, all different types of genetic predispositions and ancestry, and all of it plays into the optimal diet and lifestyle for us today.
Well, and I'm thinking about how to formulate this question, because I feel like we can illustrate this point even with your personal experience, because I would imagine that you were eating in a very specific way when you were healing your gut issues. Compared to how you were eating when you were actually preparing and planning to become pregnant. So that might be an interesting segue into just talking about preconception nutrition in general.
Let me tell you a story. So when I was trying to figure out what was wrong with my health, I did a little bit of trial and error. So I knew that like dairy was a problem, coffee was a problem, alcohol wasn't working. And slowly I started eliminating certain foods. And then when I was diagnosed, and again, this was in 2006, so there wasn't like a plethora of books and blogs and podcasts on the subject. I was literally going to libraries and bookstores to try and find information on foods that promoted inflammation. And anything that did, I eliminated. Anything that promoted healing, I ate a lot of. And it basically ended up being a whole foods, unprocessed foods kind of diet. Like it wasn't vegan, it wasn't paleo, it wasn't anything extreme. It was just unprocessed, where all the cooking was happening in my kitchen. Through the course of nutrition school, there's definitely at the time I went to school, a bend towards veganism and eating a predominantly plant-based diet. And that was what I slowly adopted. And it did not work for me. And I did it as healthfully as any human possibly can. I was sprouting all my lentils and my seeds, and I had so much what I thought of as balance. But the result for me was that I was putting on weight. I wasn't sleeping well. I was hungry constantly. I was having mood swings and PMS and these things I'd never experienced. And then I developed a whole bunch of cavities in my teeth, which up until that point, I was like 28 or 29. I'd never had a cavity in my life, and realized that this diet actually maybe wasn't suitable for me and my constitution and my makeup. And that was when I started introducing protein back in. And then as I was planning for preconception, I knew how important blood sugar balance was. So maintaining that stable blood sugar, which is basically at the root of our hormones. And if we're on this, highs and lows of these sugar crashes, it affects the entire endocrine hormone cascade. And so for preconception planning, I actually went almost, I would say, completely paleo. So it was grain-free, had no processed sugar, no dried fruits, no fruit juices, nothing concentrated sweetness that would have any dramatic impact on blood sugar levels. And I maintained that through I went through a detox protocol before becoming pregnant, and then went on this diet for about 6 weeks strictly. And I got pregnant right away. And then I maintained it as well as I could until like my food aversions and all that kicked in, and then just did the best I could. And then again, while I was pregnant, I ate what I could tolerate. And there's certain things that still became and sustained my non-negotiable or not an option status. People say all things in moderation. Some things are actually never ever foods. And when you establish that, you stick to it. So people are like, well, don't you get cravings? I'm like, yes, but there's always an option and a way to resolve that craving without eating, say, a tub of ice cream or a bag of potato chips or those kinds of things. And then when I had my baby I was breastfeeding, I was just ravenous. And I was literally eating spoonfuls of coconut oil just to try and get enough food in, and was making very, very high fat, high protein meals. And so, now that I'm still breastfeeding, he's 19 months old, though significantly less, just once or twice or 4 times a day if I'm home alone with him. But again, my diet has changed. I don't need the same calorie intake that I needed when he was a newborn. And I imagine that it will continue to change and evolve. And one of the most dangerous things we can do is take a diet and subscribe to it and tattoo it on our body as if it's part of who we are and our personality, because there is no one diet for every human being on the planet. And there's no one diet for your entire lifespan. It's just impossible to maintain optimal health with that. And one of the scariest things I see in the work that I do is people will go towards a vegan diet and have dramatic, amazing results, and then believe everyone should be on the same diet, or go on a paleo diet and have dramatic results, or a ketogenic diet. And it might be that you had this powerful healing. That doesn't mean that's the diet for the rest of your life. And that definitely doesn't mean that's a diet for every single person you know.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting that you said that. I get a lot of flack from the vegan community on my podcast because I don't actively promote a vegan diet during pregnancy.
I don't either.
And the thing is that when you look at the scientific kind of basis for what is required to build a human being, there's a lot of compelling information that would show that, there's just specific things that are required. So I think what is really important and helpful and I appreciate you for sharing your experience. I didn't actually know what you were going to say, and I didn't expect you to go there, which was really neat. So that was a really interesting story. Thank you, Meghan. But what's really to take out of that, you've basically described several different periods in your life where your nutritional requirements and the specific way that you went about eating was very, very different. And I think it's challenging, as you were talking about that, there are women who struggle, with gut issues while they're trying to conceive. And what you can take from that is that sometimes you would be required to have to make certain dietary changes during that period of time to help your body heal. But but that might actually look a bit different to the kind of optimal preconception diet. As a mom myself, I mean, there's also this idea, a lot of us really strive for perfection. We want to have this perfect diet. So I think that that's also problematic because, you know, the way I look at diet, I think that during certain periods of your life, you have to focus on incorporating certain key foods that are going to support you. But it doesn't mean like food is bad or good. Like there's just food. So you described the preconception period, you described pregnancy. And of course, within pregnancy, a lot of women have a lot of food aversions in the first, you know, trimester. For some women, it spills over into a lot longer than that.
Yeah, and I think what's important to note too is that because my husband's in clinical practice and he'll have people come in once they're pregnant and be like, "What should I do?" And that's why I say you do the best you can while you are pregnant. But so much of that foundation and the building blocks for that human are set up before you conceive this child. And the environment that it is conceived in, and all of that is so, so, so important that, and, you know, I know many women struggle with fertility and at the same time with their values or philosophies, especially if they subscribe to a vegan lifestyle that is not just for dietary reasons, but for ethics and values. But that being said, there may be times in your life to make exceptions so that you can, if you want to have a family and it's not working with whatever it is you are trying, then it's the opportunity to try other things. And, you know, I would think that dietary changes should be the first thing that is tried as opposed to going for medical interventions with fertility.
Well, and so, I mean, your practice, what you focused on from the start was food. You know, in the field of fertility, the first thing a lot of women think of are supplements. And, you know, there's kind of like this idea, you know, I'm sure you've seen quite a bit of it where it's like, well, just what supplements do I need to take? Like, how can I fix this?
Yeah, tell me, prenatal vitamin. I'm like, wow.
Tell me what to take.
That's like the 10%. That's like 10% of what we need to look at. And I actually, when I was doing my preconception planning, it spawned this new course that my husband and I offer every couple of years called Healthy at Home. Because it was like, it wasn't just the multivitamin. It's like, wait a second, what are we cleaning our house with? I mean, we already had a lot of this stuff addressed. What are my personal care products? You know, there's a bigger picture to this than just, you know, what's the best prenatal vitamin to take. It's like, well, are you still using air fresheners in your home? Because that needs to go as well. And there's so many things that are so easy to get rid of that have such massive dramatic impact. There was a story, it was a year or two ago in the New York Times, just about sunscreen and what it was doing to sperm. Like that alone is like, okay, let's get rid of personal care products that have these endocrine disruptors in them. So yes, there is the supplement. That's great. And there's all these lifestyle changes and there's food. Like it's such a multi-pronged web we've woven that needs to be untangled.
Mm-hmm. Well, so let's break it down. So in terms of your recommendations then, when it comes to preconception planning, what are we talking about here? We talk about like 3 months, a week, 6 months, 2 years. How do you start this conversation with your clients?
If anyone is listening who wants to have a baby, is not pregnant yet, today is the day to start. So
even if I want to have a baby 10 years from now?
Yeah.
I don't need to start today, do I?
Get off the birth control pill. Like that causes, I'm sure you're aware too, like, and you've probably spoken about this, but that causes long-term challenges that some women can recover from in a month or 6 months. But to actually get all that stuff out of your body takes time. If you're smoking, you need to stop today. You know, there's those basic things. But the easiest way to prepare for pregnancy is to have the least number of things you have to change. So if we start today, no matter where you're at, whether you're 10 years out or 1 month out, clean up your personal care products so that there's no chemicals in them and toxins and fragrances and those endocrine disrupting chemicals I spoke about. Clean up your cleaning products, clean up your exposure to plastics, because the bisphenol A, it's banned in baby products, but it's still in products that adults are using who are conceiving children. And your partner has to be on board too. For gentlemen, they produce their contribution more regularly than women do, but they should be on board because anything they're using is affecting you if you're living in the same home. And then cleaning up the diet. So it's really hard if you're like, okay, I want to have a baby in 6 months. And now you suddenly have to revamp everything in your medicine cabinet, revamp all the products you're using in your home. And then, you're also going to start eating 100% organic food because pesticides affect the endocrine system. They contain hormonal disruptors and also reproductive disruptors and also things that affect neural development. So the sooner you can start a transition towards a healthier, whole, less chemical laden lifestyle, the easier it's going to be when, if you do have challenges, there's less things that need to be tweaked and less variables that need to be considered. So the soonest you can get started, the better. Optimally, I would say 2 years is great. 6 months is doable. And depending on where you're at, I would say 6 months would be the minimum. If you've already cleaned everything up and you've done all that stuff, then I would really take a heavy active approach in the last 6 weeks to look at, what is the optimal diet for conception. You might want to get a micronutrient test done to see specific deficiencies. So when I had mine done, I was low in chrome and zinc. So I started supplementing extra with those nutrients so that I had all my levels in optimal range. So there's all of those factors to consider. And if you're dealing with a chronic health challenge and maybe, it involves antidepressants or other types of medications, look at how you can work with some holistic methods to optimally wean yourself off if that's an option. Obviously, there's many medications that are safe and tested to be safe during pregnancy. However, the least amount you're taking, again, one less thing to worry about. And that's what I always look at is how can we reduce the causes of concern?
Well, and as you know, a lot of women, when they're planning to conceive, they make appointments with their practitioners, maybe get, some different health tests done and fertility assessments and things like that. But typically as a culture, it's, and I've been talking about this since like day one of the podcast, but it's like, typically we're told just take a prenatal and, take a nap. Like that's it. Right. So maybe share why what you're telling us is so different than our modern paradigm, like why is there such a big disconnect in your opinion?
Well, I mean, we're seeing dramatic increase in rates in infertility, and it's not just coincidence or by accident. So most of us, I mean, there's a few factors that we're having children later in life, generally for women, but there's also the factors that a lot of us are not in our optimal health, that, chronic health challenges are near epidemic. And with that comes different types of potentially negative habits. And so like a lot of that needs to be addressed first before you bring a human into the world, because what we're also seeing now is higher rates in all kinds of, they're often referred to in some literature as birth defects. I think that'd be a very harsh way to look at a lot of what we're seeing, but children being born and then developing autism, or on a perhaps, there is the spectrum of that, but vision problems, hearing problems, learning challenges, different types of behavioral challenges, sleeping issues, like digestive issues. Like we're seeing all of this in children younger and younger and younger. And that also isn't just coincidence. And this isn't to, blame parents by any means. It's that this is simply the environment that we live in. And when you follow kind of the standard diet, you're buying your cleaning products at the supermarket, you're buying all these products that have any number of chemicals in them. It's just what has happened. And so people will challenge like, oh, but is it really necessary to eat organic food? Like it's more expensive, it's harder to find. But the thing is, to eat organic isn't going to any extreme. That's like the baseline of how human beings were intended to eat, to consume no chemicals, like heavy chemicals that are in everything we're using. So to just take a prenatal, that's great. Like, let's start there. But if you're listening to this and you're like, I really want to do all that I can, there is so much that can be done. And it doesn't have to be an extreme upheaval of your entire lifestyle. In many cases, it's just choosing one thing over another, buying this instead of that and using this instead of that, or not using that anymore, or taking on some really powerful lifestyle practices. I was doing prenatal yoga while I was pregnant, and my yoga teacher became a good friend of mine. She's in the Toronto community. Her name's Laura Wood. She's wonderful, and her company is And She Moves. But she said so many women come to yoga and get injured because they've never done yoga before in their life, but suddenly can no longer do their intensive exercise they were doing before they became pregnant. So now they're turning to yoga. But getting, before you become pregnant, while you still have your normal levels of energy and you feel like you're used to feeling, take on those relaxation practices to lower that cortisol and start meditating or coloring or going for walks in nature, whatever it is that helps you move into that parasympathetic nervous system state. That's all part of the delicious soup we're trying to cook up. And every effort matters. And if we can do this before we become pregnant, it's so much easier to maintain, not just during our pregnancy, but to bring that into and have that established in the home and in the world that we're bringing our child into. We're exposing these little tiny beings to less hazards and less harm. For me, at least, that felt like a very reassuring thing, especially in a world where, we see the challenges every single day. So what can I do? And maybe that's a way for me to channel my own anxiety about having this little tiny human in this big wide world. But there is also, innumerable benefits to so many different facets of it, to my health, to his health, to my recovery. And I should mention, I did not have a perfect first pregnancy. I said that I got pregnant really quickly. I also had a miscarriage after 3 months. And so, there's no guarantees with any of this at all. But I looked at that and felt grateful that, I had a pregnancy that wasn't viable and my body did what it needed to do. And I did get pregnant again quicker than I had anticipated, and then had a very strong and healthy pregnancy. However, I then had a very traumatic birth where my son ended up in the NICU for a week on an IV of antibiotics and fluorescent yellow dextrose for a few days before he was able to nurse. And so you can't plan for everything. But I still hold that his rapid recovery and my rapid physical recovery it's all part of it. It's establishing this foundation on which to build a life and build a family.
Well, I mean, I like that. I think that it's kind of jarring for women to hear that you can and possibly should consider starting to prepare for pregnancy like today, even if pregnancy is way out. Because the way that our culture and the way that kind of is current standard medical practice is to basically treat the menstrual cycle and a woman's fertility as irrelevant until she's trying to get pregnant. And just the way that we are not taught about our menstrual cycles and our health and our fertility, it really lends itself to this idea that I'm guessing, so Meghan, you tell me, I know when I was growing up, I was taught that I could get pregnant at any time, and it was basically a sure thing. Any single time I could have sex. This is the
second time we've been speaking where you've basically said exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of sets us up, doesn't it? Right? So if you go into your young life as a woman believing that you can get pregnant on every day, it sets you up for hormonal birth control. And then it also sets you up to take it until like the minute before you're ready to conceive, because when you're on it, even though you know you're planning pregnancy, you're terrified that as soon as you're going to come off of it, you're going to get pregnant like that day, like that evening.
Yeah. And quite honestly, I would be a little bit terrified about someone getting pregnant on their first cycle after coming off the pill.
Of course.
Because there's a lot of work to do in the body after being on the pill. And I too thought that I don't know why I didn't know you only can get pregnant like 5 to 7 days out of the month. And I think I had like this misconception from probably when I was 9 years old and saw an episode of Degrassi Junior High when Spike gets pregnant. And it's like, oh my God, how did that happen?
Well, I was categorically told that by in my sex ed class. And I feel like what you said about having that thought that I can start preparing for pregnancy now and that I can live my life in a certain way, kind of as though, like not like fully there, because there's certain things I like the occasional glass of wine from time to time, right? Not necessarily going full throttle as if you were pregnant today, but having that concept in your mind of like, what could I do to preserve and even honor my fertility, to prepare my body for pregnancy? How would I act if I was pregnant now? Having that mindset. I'm glad that you said that, because I think as women, because we're not taught a lot about our fertility and our cycles, it's helpful to kind of hear that and recognize that our fertility isn't something we can just take for granted. Like, it's not just we can't just like totally destroy our bodies throughout our entire like teens and 20s and early 30s and then just expect everything to just magically be fine.
Yeah. And what's crazy is because women go off the pill and then don't get pregnant. And then I think right now the diagnosis of infertility is if you cannot become pregnant within 6 months. So if you go off the pill and you haven't had a normal cycle yet, or, there's so many factors that can affect it. And, having a regular cycle is something we can start paying attention to again immediately, even if we don't do any other changes yet, but we start tracking our cycle and noticing the changes in our body. And if we're not having a regular cycle or not ovulating, then that's something we can start addressing now rather than when we're like, okay, I'm 38 years old and I can't get pregnant. And like now the clock is really ticking. And there's just, and I don't want to overwhelm anyone. And, you mentioned the glass of wine. I drink wine. I drank wine up until that key, I think 6 or 8 week period before I became pregnant, because I like drinking wine. And it's not like I have it every single day by any means. Like, to live a healthful life doesn't mean abstaining from every single thing. When I drink wine, however, I'm choosing organic wine. Or if I have like rum, which we actually just found organic rum, that's what it is. And it's once in a while. So it's just upgrading what we're already doing. So the changes don't need to be dramatic, and they shouldn't be dramatic, because none of this should be stressful. No part of conception should be stressful, because there'll be plenty of stress when that baby arrives. Mm-hmm. Like, there's lots of things to worry about then. So we can, take on these things gradually. And that's what I write about on my blog. And I talk about primarily in my first book, is how you can transition to a healthful and abundant way of living where you don't feel like, oh, I can't wait to get pregnant and get this baby out of me so I can go back to all those other things. It's that you slowly not want them anymore. Your tastes change, your desires change, and the world you want to live in changes. And it happens. And when you can do it, that's why I say, if you can start today with like one thing and then bring on something new next month, it becomes effortless. And that's what we all want, I think.
Well, and I'm always thinking about what the listeners might be considering. And so, I mean, we've painted this like lovely, ideal picture of what life can be like if you know this stuff, right? Like, we live in a culture and no matter where you live in the world, where this isn't emphasized. So your average woman doesn't really know this and really is doing the absolute best that she can. When she's taken those prenatals, I mean, that's what her doctor told her to do. That's what the kind of current paradigm tells her to do. So this knowledge and awareness of the additional things that we can do, the additional ways that we can eat healthily, clean, incorporate specific foods with key nutrients to support fertility, like all of the different things that we can do, that's just not common knowledge. So for the woman who's listening, who's like literally pregnant right now and did not take 6 months to 2 years to do any of these things and is now feeling really bad about herself, what do you have, how do you talk to your clients in those situations where they did the best they could, but they didn't really do to the ideal picturesque way that we're describing?
Don't feel bad at all. All we can do, and I would commend that person listening for being active and proactive and tuning into your podcast and listening to the guests you have on and looking for that information. It's never, ever, ever too late. And so all we can do is our best with what we know at the time. And that's where it starts and that's where it finishes. Like, you can't, like Oasis said, don't look back in anger. Like you can't, because there's nothing you can do. And so all we do once we know something is we choose to take that on, or we decide it's not for us. And you decide, you know what, I don't need to do that. But every day there is the option and there is a choice. And all we can do is make the choices with the knowledge that we have in that moment. And so there's no sense in having regrets or wishing things to be different. It's like, okay, now I know this. What can I do now to move forward? And that goes for, not just women who are pregnant or women with children or women who have no interest in this, but they're a friend of yours, so they listen to your podcast. But it applies to every part of our health and every part of our life, is that we make decisions with the knowledge that we have in that time. And, we talked very briefly before we started recording just about having businesses and, how they progress. And with anything, like, as you had said, hindsight is 20/20, but you can't go back. And when we worry too much about going back in time, wanting to change things, that's when depression kicks in. And when we worry too much with the future and things we can't control, anxiety kicks in. So if we can just be in the moment and make decisions with the knowledge we have and be proud of the efforts we're making today, that's all you can ask of yourself and all you can expect of yourself. And if you sort of blew it today, that's cool too, because tomorrow's another opportunity to try. And as cheesy as what I'm saying might sound, it's just the truth of it. Mm-hmm. And that's all we can ask.
Well, and I wanted to take a couple of minutes to touch on kind of like the postpartum period and pick up on something that you said that I definitely related to as a new mom both times, which is that it's interesting, you go through a phase before you, like, so in my case, with my youngest son, I was eating in a specific way for a year because I had just had they were about almost 3 years apart in age. So I it was very planned. It's always very planned around here with the fertility awareness method and whatnot. But yeah, so I was eating in a very specific way for that year. And then I became pregnant. And then I became more focused, kind of similar to what you said, like, no more alcohol after you're pregnant and all of that in my case. And so that was a bit different. And then postpartum was a whole new phase where literally I felt the same way as you described, which was that as soon as I started lactating, my goodness, like I needed to eat. And it would kind of come up on me like that, like
yeah,
in regular life, kind of like not in the immediately postpartum period. I would gradually get hungry, but in the postpartum period, it was like I would go from 0 to 10, and it's like I need to have like 6 burgers in my belly like yesterday. Like, where's my food? So maybe share some of the challenges that arise and in the postpartum period, and maybe what some of the different things that we can do to prepare, and also maybe how some of our dietary requirements can shift.
Yeah, and this is another thing that I have no research to support this, but so I was interviewed for another podcast. I didn't know that it was a vegan focused podcast. And when I talked about what I was eating postpartum and as a means to stave off postpartum depression, I don't know that it came off agreeably for the host. So she never aired it, but it's just so fundamental to getting high quality fat and protein. And if you're going to do it on a vegan diet, which that's your choice, you're going to have to be extremely, extremely mindful that you are getting enough fat to fuel your brain and the developing nervous system of your child if you are breastfeeding. So what we did, my son was by medical measure, I suppose, 2 weeks late. By my measure, he was right when he was supposed to be arriving. But in those 2 weeks, I just kept cooking and cooking and cooking. And we bought the small freezer we had in our basement. And it was stacked. Obviously, this is like virtually impossible if you're expecting your second or your third or your fourth or your eighth child, but we had the time. And so we really maximized that. But one of the best things that I made was these super milks. So I made a base of almond milk and then blended into it. And I did all different flavors so I wouldn't get sick of them. Like one of them was raspberries. Raspberry has a lactic acid, which is really helpful for hormones and hormonal balance. So I would do that, like a raspberry milk that just was like this almond milk with tons of raspberries blended in and flax oil and some maca and all these sort of hormone rebalancers and tons of fat in that. So I did a raspberry milk. I did a chocolate milk. So I just did these like calorie rich, nutrient dense, one hand ready to go meals. And I froze them all in jars and I was literally drinking them by the liter. And it like saved me. And I, in my mind, when I was making them, I'm like, oh, this will make a great breakfast. It was like before I even got out of bed in the morning, I'd be in bed breastfeeding and my husband would bring me one and it'd be down in a second. And so those kinds of things were so helpful. A great book, I don't know if you've mentioned this before, but a great book is For the First 40 Days. There's some really nice recipe inspiration in there. Mm-hmm. But I did these little squares that were like, almost like if you imagine like a Rice Krispie treat, but no marshmallow. Instead, it was like an almond butter and ghee, or you can do it with coconut oil, the crispy rice, some honey, some nuts and seeds were mixed into that. So there are these, again, one hand protein and fat powered little bars so that I could just get that fuel going and optimally beat the hunger before I became like a ravenous beast and wanting to grab less effective forms of fuel. Because one of the hardest things is when you're just so hungry and you need that and want that quick energy, you end up craving the pastries and sugary things and those things that give you that super quick rush of energy, but it also peters out really fast and you end up on a cycle of, the high highs and the low lows. And that obviously is not awesome for if you are dealing with or working to prevent postpartum depression.
Mm-hmm. I know for me, when I was postpartum with my youngest, all I wanted was bone broth. I remember I went to the meat shop. It's a great little meat shop close to where I live that sources meat from local Ontario farmers, which is cool. And I remember I bought a ton of bones and all I wanted was like that gelatinous collagen-rich broth. And I remember as soon as I kind of felt like I was going into labor, like I just threw it in the crock pot. And I was so glad I did because it just felt like it was nourishing for the body. So I think it's really helpful to have that state of mind. If you have the ability to cook the food, as was in your case, ahead of time, that's so helpful. It can't be understated because you think you're going to have time. Like you think your life is going to be the same post-baby. You think that there's 24 hours in a day. And so of course I'll have time to cook, but it's a completely different world that you enter into post-baby.
Because you're actually up for those 24 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other activity that's not essential is like, oh no.
Yeah.
I was also eating liver. I just remembered I made these liver pâtés in advance too, that I was eating a ton of it's just such a nutrient rich, nourishing food. I couldn't do bone broth and I had made a bunch because when I went into labor, my mom was over and then our midwives, my doula came over and my mom heated up soup for everybody. And while I'm in like this horrible, horrible labor, the whole house smelled like chicken soup. And I was like, oh God, make that stop. And then so it took a few weeks before I could even look at it, let alone.
Wow. Oh man, note to self, kind of watch what smells are around during labor.
Yeah. Like I will never drink coconut water again my whole life.
Oh no.
Never.
Oh. Well, I mean, it sounds like you really were able to just do some planning ahead and some forethought. So, for the listeners, I recorded a podcast with Kimberly Ann Johnson from Mega Mamas, who wrote the book, The Fourth Trimester. And we talked extensively about that period of time and just how, as a culture, we don't really honor that. We don't even really acknowledge it. We don't really care for women during that time. So unfortunately, it's kind of up to us as, new moms when we're planning to conceive or when we're pregnant to really think about how we can kind of arrange to be supported during that time, whether that's cooking ahead, like in your case, setting up food trains, having family members and friends. Like the price of admission to my home is like, some sort of food item or whatever you need to do.
You're either bringing food or you're doing the laundry.
Yeah, you pick one. Bring some rubber gloves. You're going to clean something while you're here.
Yeah. Everyone just wants to hold the baby. I'm like, I'm good holding the baby. I worked hard for this.
Yeah.
Please take care of that.
Exactly. Where are your gloves? No, seriously, you need to clean something. Well, thank you so much for being here, Meghan. This was a really great conversation. Let the listeners know where they can go to learn more about you and also, the different programs that you offer and your books and, all the great things that you're doing.
Yes. So I have on my website at meghantelpner.com, in my blog, there's actually a mom and baby category now where I have all my posts on preconception planning, on breastfeeding, my birth story, my miscarriage story. It's all there, including my I think it's 15 essentials for a healthy nursery. So check that out. It's all free and available. I'm at Meghan Telpner on Instagram, and I run the Academy of Culinary Nutrition, which is a 14-week certification program. And we have tons of moms on mat leave do the program, and also moms of small children doing it to learn ways to really healthify the diets from an early age. And so all of that about the school is at culinarynutrition.com. Oh, and I also have a post on my blog, which would probably be of interest to a lot of your listeners, on food introductions, which is a popular and hot topic and very confusing for moms. So you can check that one out too.
Awesome. Well, and I thought, so this is in the wrong order, but then after I asked that question, I realized that I did want to ask you, because we did cover a lot of ground today and we talked about different periods, in life from fertility to pregnancy and postpartum. If the listeners could take one thing from our conversation today, what would you want them to leave with?
I think that, again, I commend everyone listening for taking the time to listen and to seek out the type of information that's shared through this podcast. And so give yourself a big pat on the back for that. And just know that by asking questions and finding the answers that resonate with you, you will find and follow the best option for yourself. So don't become overwhelmed by the details and too many experts and what so-and-so is doing and this person's doing, and all that comparing and competing is like the vacuum to our soul. So I talked about a lot of things. A lot of the other experts talk about a lot of things. Take the stuff that resonates with you and that makes sense and that to you is like, yeah, I can do that. That's doable. And then move forward from there. That the stress we can create in our own minds and in our lives is more harmful for our health and for our fertility and for our unborn and born children than anything else we can do. And so if we can find ways to find that peace and happiness, that's most important of all.
Love it. Wonderful words to end on. Thank you so much for being here, Meghan. It was great to have a chance to finally connect because as we're in our pre-chat, I mentioned we live in the same city and we know some of the same people. So it's nice to finally connect.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. It was lovely chatting with you. And thank you for all that you're doing for all the women out there.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/260. I hope that you enjoyed my episode with Meghan. It was super fun to have a chance to chat with her. It's always fun to talk to someone who is local and who is also working to, raise awareness about health and fertility. And she's done really great things. So thanks again, Meghan, for coming on the show. And, this topic was really interesting. It's really fascinating just to think about how we look at preconception as a culture. And the way we look at it, really, we kind of gloss over it. We don't really think of it as a specific period of time. We don't really have that ingrained kind of idea that we should be eating in a specific way for a period of time before pregnancy, and focusing, not just on kind of like the basics of quote unquote eating healthy, but really focusing on specific nutrients to really try to build up our stores. So, one of the things that I always talk about when it comes to preconception nutrition is to really build up that bank account. I like that analogy when you go into pregnancy, because the only thing that happens when you're building a human with your body and then, postpartum, if you're able to breastfeed, is that really you're the primary source of nutrition for anywhere from, 4 to 6 months and potentially more, depending on how long you breastfeed. And so these natural processes really drain our stores of virtually every nutrient available. So in addition to structuring your diet in a way that you're getting lots of, protein, healthy fats, sufficient carbohydrates. So really balancing your macronutrients appropriately. It's also really important to consider incorporating specific foods that are high in the key nutrients that we need, both in the preconception period so that we can build up our nutrient stores, as well as during pregnancy. And that consciousness about fertility and just the concept of, preserving our fertility. And I like how Meghan talked about it outside of just food, because it was, in addition to that, thinking about how we live our lives, thinking about the products that we're using, just thinking about even our environment and the things that we can do to improve our overall, endocrine health by making sure that we're not exposing ourselves to chemicals and toxins, both in our food and also in our environments. I really appreciated that perspective. And I think her answer just stuck with me because I've asked similar questions to different guests, and I don't think I've had a guest that's, when I ask how long should we prepare for pregnancy, from today, I don't think I've really had that answer before. And I think that it's a really interesting thing. It can kind of help us switch our mindset around fertility, because I know one of the biggest messages that I like to share about fertility is that we really have to learn about our fertility and how it works. We really have to counteract a lot of the misinformation and straight up false information that we're told about our fertility from, the incorrect assertion that we can get pregnant on every day of our cycles to the way that medicine typically treats the menstrual cycle as completely irrelevant until you're ready to have babies. In this episode, we touched a couple times on the impact of hormonal birth control. And I mean, Meghan's absolutely right that we should really be considering coming off of birth control well in advance of when we're trying to conceive, to give our body time to really come down off the hormones. And the reason for that is because, the research shows us that hormonal birth control use is associated with a temporary delay in the return of our natural fertility. And that temporary delay in our natural fertility can last anywhere from 6 to 18 months or more, depending on the type of birth control that you were using, and also depending on your menstrual cycle health prior to taking the hormonal birth control. So if you were put on birth control because you had menstrual cycle irregularities or because your periods were really erratic and you didn't know when your next one was coming, you're at an increased risk of then developing post-pill amenorrhea. Not because the pill or other, hormonal birth control was causing that, but because if you had a pre-existing issue, the pill doesn't fix it. So that issue is still happening in the background and it's not addressed. The pill doesn't actually address it. It doesn't cure it. It doesn't fix it. So these are things that as women, we need to be aware of. We need to be able to take those things into consideration as we're planning our futures, and have the ability then to organize and structure our lives in such a way that we can incorporate, these things into the decisions. As we know, time is a really big factor. As we get older, I think we all have this increasing awareness that, our fertility is not forever. There's a limited period of time where we can conceive and have babies. And so because time is of the essence, it's really important for us to know this stuff ahead of time so that we can incorporate this knowledge and awareness into our plans. So then instead of waiting until, the minute we're ready to conceive to come off the pill and to start incorporating some of these practices, dietary changes, addressing any nutrient deficiencies and those types of things, as well as, our environment, instead of waiting until the minute we're ready to start doing those things, it's really helpful to start thinking about that now and to really think about some of those gradual things that we can incorporate so that by the time we are fully ready to start trying for our families, that we've already addressed a lot of those. So I really, really appreciate that message. And, something else that we touched on briefly was how this isn't just a women's issue. So we definitely have a bias in our culture that fertility is specifically up to us as women, as if we can get ourselves pregnant or something, but it takes two. And although we carry the baby and our body nourishes the baby, 50% of that genetic material comes from a man. And so it's equally, if not more important, for men to focus on their nutrition during a preconception period and for them to do the very same things that we're doing, to focus on the very same nutrients and to incorporate a lot of these health practices, because male infertility is really on the rise and it's not talked about as much as it needs to be. And it's beyond just, your partner or my partner. It's on a huge global scale. And it's this declining trend of reduced fertility and reduced sperm count and quality has been happening for decades. And so it's bigger than you, it's bigger than me. And really, we have to start being aware of that and acknowledge that really and truly, in order to prepare for pregnancy, one of the most important things is to actually focus on male fertility and ensure that we're doing everything we can to support healthy sperm production in the same way that we would focus on ensuring that we have healthy menstrual cycles. So with that said, I'll link in the show notes page a few episodes in particular to support you. If this is one of the first episodes that you're tuning into and you're really interested in what you can do to prepare for pregnancy, there's several other episodes that really address this that I'm going to direct your attention to. So one of the episodes is actually one of the very first episodes. It's episode 9 with Sally Fallon Morrell from the Weston A. Price Foundation. In that episode, she talks about specific foods to incorporate to improve fertility and to the foods that have been shown to contain the nutrients we really need to build healthy babies. So that's a really important episode to listen to if you're trying to plan for the preconception phase. Also, episode 188, Real Food for Pregnancy with Lily Nichols. That's one of my go-to resources whenever my clients are asking me for, I want a book. I'm, planning to get pregnant or I'm pregnant already and I want to know how I should be eating. What's great about Real Food for Pregnancy is that Lily lists over 900 citations. And so she shares with you her recommendations and, in terms of diet, and she really goes into a lot of the lifestyle practices as well. But it's not one of those books where it's just like, okay, take my word for it, whatever, do these things. I appreciate Real Food for Pregnancy because it's evidence-based and really all of the recommendations are backed up by specific examples from the scientific literature that really indicate that, in some cases, even our recommended dietary allowances for certain nutrients may be too low for specific periods of time. So kind of like what, Meghan was talking about at the beginning of our episode today, that there are some points in your life where you may have to eat differently. So there's not one diet for every single person and there's not one diet for every single period of your life. So, when you're preparing for pregnancy and when you're pregnant and then in the postpartum period, your nutritional requirements for, pretty much all but several very specific nutrients increases dramatically for that period of time. And so then the way that you would eat and the way that you would kind of think about how to structure your diet and the different choices that you're making for that specific period of time should really be different than in general, because there's a lot of things that we can kind of get away with on a day-to-day basis, but during pregnancy, it becomes really acute. And so our nutritional requirements of iron and folate and choline and vitamin A and vitamin D and iodine and, just goes on and on and on. But our nutritional requirements for these specific nutrients increase dramatically during this special period of time. So the preconception period is really important. And everything I just said also applies equally to men for that period of time.
So I just want to thank you again for spending some time with me today, for tuning into today's episode. If you're in that stage of thinking about preconception planning, optimizing your cycles, and you haven't yet grabbed your copy of The Fifth Vital Sign, I would encourage you to head over to Amazon. It's available in ebook, paperback, and now audiobook formats. For the audiobook, you can head over to fertilityfriday.com/audible. And if you're wanting a sample, if you want to just check it out to see before you commit to making the purchase, you can head over to thefifthvitalsignbook.com. And you can actually download the first chapter of The Fifth Vital Sign for free there. So again, that's thefifthvitalsignbook.com. And so I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend, whenever you are listening to this episode. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.